This is not a story about wealth or poverty. It's about a moment when power forgets to be careful. One small reaction exposed a truth no one wanted to see. Two young boys walked away without a word. Years of authority didn't prepare her for what silence can do. Power rarely announces itself as cruel, it presents itself as deserved. In modern America, power often wears the language of merit, discipline, and resilience, convincing both its holder and its observers that its position is natural and unquestionable. Vivian Caldwell had grown into that belief slowly, almost invisibly, the way steel hardens under repeated pressure. By the time her name became synonymous with influence, she no longer questioned why doors opened for her. She only noticed when they failed to open for others. Vivian's rise through finance was documented, celebrated, and retold as proof that the system worked. Analysts praised her strategic discipline, commentators highlighted her composure, and magazines framed her success as inspirational rather than interrogative. Each milestone reinforced the same conclusion: her authority was earned, and therefore justified. Philanthropy followed naturally, not as obligation but as confirmation. Her donations were visible, structured, and applauded, further insulating her from scrutiny. To the public, generosity validated her dominance. To Vivian, it confirmed her moral clarity. Over time, admiration reshaped her internal compass. The constant affirmation did not make her reckless, it made her precise. She learned to speak in ways that commanded attention without demanding it, to move through spaces as though she belonged everywhere by default. Confidence hardened into certainty, and certainty gradually narrowed her emotional field of vision. The farther she rose, the less she encountered resistance, and the less she recognized it when it appeared. What remained was a quiet assumption that those without her reach lacked not only resources, but understanding. Wealth did not corrupt Vivian through excess. It altered her through distance. Decisions that once required deliberation became instinctive. Consequences that once felt immediate became abstract. The people around her reflected her success back to her in language polished enough to sound like truth. In this environment, humility was not discouraged, it simply became unnecessary. Emotional distance was not intentional, but it was inevitable, formed by layers of protection built through years of winning. The world she occupied rewarded composure and dismissed friction. Public spaces adjusted to her presence. Institutions anticipated her needs. Even criticism, when it appeared, arrived softened by respect. This ecosystem did more than elevate Vivian, it shielded her. It created a social architecture in which her misjudgments could pass unnoticed, reframed as decisiveness or misunderstood as strength. Power in this form did not need to be defended. It was assumed. Yet this same architecture depended on invisibility. It functioned best when those outside it remained undefined, unnamed, and unseen. The system that lifted Vivian also filtered what reached her awareness. Complexity was simplified. Discomfort was redirected. People without proximity to power became part of the background, present but unexamined. Vivian did not actively dismiss them. She simply did not register them as consequential. In her world, relevance followed influence, not humanity. As years passed, the narrative surrounding Vivian grew more rigid. Success stories hardened into mythology, and mythology resists contradiction. Any challenge to her authority risked being interpreted as envy or incompetence rather than inquiry. This dynamic reinforced her isolation, though it rarely felt lonely. She was surrounded, advised, and applauded. What she lacked was friction, the kind that reveals blind spots before they become fractures. This was not arrogance in its loudest form. It was subtler, more dangerous. It lived in assumptions made without malice, in judgments formed without reflection. It was the belief that perspective naturally followed position, that understanding was a byproduct of success. Within this belief, power did not need to listen. It only needed to proceed. The social environment around Vivian had learned to protect her from discomfort as efficiently as it protected her from failure. Mistakes were reframed. Consequences were delayed. The system did not challenge her worldview because it benefited from it. In such a space, self-examination became optional, and empathy became performative. Vivian remained admired, effective, and respected, unaware that the very structure supporting her was also narrowing her awareness. It was within this carefully balanced world that an ordinary moment waited. Not a scandal, not a confrontation, not an act of defiance. Just a brief interaction, small enough to feel inconsequential, yet sharp enough to test the strength of her certainty. The architecture that had protected Vivian for so long did not collapse in that moment. It shifted almost imperceptibly, creating a tension she would not immediately recognize, because power rarely senses danger when it comes quietly. And in that quiet, the first fracture began to form. Some children grow up learning how to survive long before they learn how to dream. Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes were shaped by that reality from an early age, raised in a neighborhood that existed on the margins of attention. It was not a place defined by chaos, but by absence. Absence of investment, absence of patience, absence of second chances. The streets taught lessons faster than schools ever could, and neither boy mistook that education for kindness. Their community functioned under constant pressure, where small disruptions carried lasting consequences. Public systems appeared inconsistently, offering rules without protection and expectations without support. Malik learned early how to read adults by what they avoided rather than what they said. Jordan learned to recognize patterns in broken promises. Neither viewed their surroundings as temporary. This was not a phase to endure. It was a reality to navigate with precision and restraint. Instability was not dramatic but relentless. Rent notices appeared without warning. Schools changed leadership without changing outcomes. Authority figures came and went, leaving policies behind that no one enforced consistently. Malik absorbed these shifts quietly, understanding that attention could be dangerous. Jordan internalized responsibility at an age when others still expected protection. Their childhood did not end suddenly. It narrowed, focused, and demanded maturity without explanation. What separated them from despair was not hope, but clarity. They understood the limits of their environment without romanticizing struggle. Emotional maturity came not from guidance, but from necessity. Malik became observant, listening more than speaking, recognizing that information traveled unevenly. Jordan became deliberate, careful with decisions, aware that mistakes were often punished harder for those without buffers. Together, they learned how to move without being noticed. Their loyalty was not sentimental. It was practical, forged through shared awareness rather than shared dreams. Each understood the other's silences without requiring reassurance. They covered gaps without discussion, anticipating needs before they became visible. In a world that offered little margin for error, trust became currency. Loyalty was survival, not symbolism, and neither took it lightly. While others responded to limitation with resistance, Malik and Jordan chose observation. They noticed how rules bent for some and hardened for others. They saw how authority operated selectively, rewarding familiarity over fairness. Rather than rebelling against these systems, they studied them. They learned which behaviors drew attention and which allowed passage. This was not submission. It was strategy shaped by experience. Their intelligence did not announce itself. It settled quietly, built through repetition and consequence. Malik learned to measure environments before engaging them. Jordan learned to wait, understanding that timing mattered more than volume. Both recognized that reacting emotionally often fed systems designed to absorb and dismiss anger. Patience became their advantage, though neither would have described it that way. What they carried was not bitterness, but awareness. They did not believe the world owed them anything, nor did they believe they were invisible by accident. Invisibility was functional. It allowed systems to operate without accountability. Understanding that truth gave them clarity without illusion. They did not seek validation from institutions that had already failed to recognize them. Despite scarcity, their inner lives were not empty. They valued precision, consistency, and restraint. Dreams existed, but they were deferred, folded into practicality. Survival came first. Malik and Jordan understood that survival was not weakness, but preparation. Every limitation sharpened their attention. Every dismissal refined their patience. Unnoticed by those above them, their quiet existence continued, grounded in routine and awareness. They moved through public spaces without expectation, carrying experiences that had trained them to read power without confronting it. They did not know whose world they would eventually enter, only that when it happened, they would recognize it immediately, because the distance between invisibility and consequence is shorter than it appears. A single laugh can define who is seen and who is erased. The setting itself was unremarkable, a transitional space where people passed through without expecting significance. It was the kind of environment designed for efficiency, not reflection, where status often traveled invisibly, recognized instinctively by those accustomed to it. Vivian Caldwell moved through that space with the ease of someone long accustomed to recognition. Her presence reorganized attention without effort, a byproduct of reputation rather than intention. Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes occupied the same space without altering it. Their presence did not register as interruption or influence. They were positioned where the system had trained them to stand, close enough to observe, distant enough to remain irrelevant. They had learned that proximity did not equal access, and visibility did not equal acknowledgement. This moment, like many before it, appeared routine. The encounter unfolded without ceremony. There was no confrontation, no raised voices, no explicit judgment. What marked it was its subtlety. Vivian's response emerged not as words, but as a laugh, brief, contained, and effortlessly dismissive. It was not amusement, it was classification. A social signal delivered instinctively, communicating hierarchy more efficiently than explanation ever could. That laugh carried assumptions shaped by years of insulation. It reduced complexity into certainty. It confirmed who belonged and who did not. In that instant, Malik and Jordan were not individuals, they were background. The laugh did not target them personally. That was its power. It functioned as an administrative gesture, sorting relevance without engagement. The reinforcement of hierarchy was immediate and quiet. No one intervened because nothing appeared wrong. The system recognized the behavior as normal, even appropriate. Authority was reaffirmed through ease, not aggression. Vivian did not linger on the moment. For her, it registered as confirmation, not conflict. The world responded as expected, absorbing the interaction without disruption. For Malik and Jordan, the impact was heavier, though no less controlled. They understood the message instantly. The laugh carried weight not because it was cruel, but because it was effortless. It reflected a confidence built on unchallenged assumptions. In that brief exchange, they were not only dismissed, but categorized as inconsequential. The psychological effect was not humiliation, it was clarity. Years of observation had prepared them for moments like this. The reduction to insignificance was familiar. What made this instance distinct was its source. The distance between them and Vivian represented more than wealth. It represented access to narrative, to definition, to authority over meaning. Malik registered the laugh as information. Jordan noted its timing and audience. Neither reacted outwardly. Reaction would have fed the hierarchy they recognized too well. Silence, in this context, was not compliance. It was containment. They understood that visibility gained through reaction often came with consequences that benefited no one. The restraint they chose was not passive. It was silence becomes dangerous when it is intentional. For Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes, silence was not absence, it was processing. The moment Vivian Caldwell's laugh faded into the background noise of the space they occupied, neither boy felt the urge to fill it. There was no immediate exchange of looks, no whispered reaction, no visible shift in posture. Their stillness was not confusion, it was recognition. Each understood that what had just occurred carried meaning beyond the surface, and meaning required time. They processed the incident internally, the way they had learned to process most things. Malik revisited the details with precision, the timing, the ease, the certainty behind the gesture. Jordan focused on the environment, who noticed, who didn't, and why. This internal division of attention had become instinctive over years of navigating unstable systems. Together, without coordination, they reconstructed the moment into information. Silence allowed accuracy. Reaction would have distorted it. Silence had long been a learned survival mechanism. In their world, speaking too soon often invited misunderstanding or consequence. Silence created space to evaluate risk, to measure intent, and to choose response rather than surrender to impulse. Malik had learned early that explanations were rarely rewarded. Jordan had learned that restraint often preserved options. Their quiet was not submission, it was insulation against systems that thrived on predictable reactions. Hardship had shaped their emotional regulation with discipline rather than detachment. They did not suppress feeling, they organized it. Anger, disappointment, and awareness were acknowledged internally, then placed aside until useful. This discipline was not taught. It was accumulated through repetition, through watching what happened to those who reacted loudly and were quickly labeled, dismissed, or removed from consideration. Emotional control was not moral superiority. It was practical intelligence. In moments like this, the difference between powerlessness and patience became clear. Powerlessness reacts because it believes reaction is all it has. Patience waits because it understands time as leverage. Malik and Jordan did not confuse the two. They knew they lacked institutional power, but they did not lack agency. Agency expressed itself through timing, not confrontation. The system expected noise. They offered none. Vivian Caldwell remained entirely unaware. The encounter had resolved itself from her perspective the moment it ended. She moved forward with her schedule intact, her attention redirected towards spaces that mirrored her importance back to her. The system reinforced her sense of normalcy. No signal reached her to suggest disruption. Silence, in this context, protected her as much as it concealed the boy's response. As Vivian progressed through her day, the interaction dissolved into irrelevance. The architecture of her world filtered it out efficiently. For her, silence indicated agreement or insignificance. It confirmed the hierarchy she assumed. She did not consider alternative interpretations because none had ever been necessary. Her confidence relied on the predictability of outcomes, not the examination of cause. For Malik and Jordan, silence initiated a different trajectory. They began watching more closely, not just Vivian, but the patterns surrounding her. Attention sharpened. They noticed how people adjusted their behavior in her presence, how decisions shifted subtly when her name was invoked, how access appeared and disappeared in response to proximity. Observation expanded beyond the incident into the system that had produced it. This watching was not obsessive, it was calibrated. They understood that systems revealed themselves over time through repetition. One moment rarely told the whole story. Malik tracked consistency, Jordan tracked deviation. Their silence created space for accumulation, for understanding without interference. The absence of reaction preserved their invisibility, and invisibility preserved access. They did not discuss motives or outcomes. They discussed mechanics, how authority functioned, how dismissal operated without friction, how certainty protected itself. This analytical approach transformed the incident from personal slight into structural insight. Silence had allowed them to see beyond emotion into process. Meanwhile, Vivian continued untouched, her world functioning as designed. The distance between her awareness and theirs widened without detection. She did not sense scrutiny because it arrived without challenge. She did not recognize risk because it emerged without noise. The systems she trusted to alert her to disruption remained quiet, interpreting calm as stability. Silence, chosen and sustained, altered the balance without announcing itself. Malik and Jordan's restraint did not neutralize the moment, it preserved it. The incident became reference rather than reaction, context rather than conflict. In that preservation, potential began to form, quiet and undefined. As Vivian moved forward, certain of her footing, the boys' attention narrowed with purpose. They were no longer simply navigating their environment, they were studying it. And in that study, silence ceased to be defensive. It became deliberate. While she advanced untouched, assuming the moment had ended, Malik and Jordan began watching closely, understanding that what remained unspoken often mattered most. The higher someone rises, the fewer truths reach them. Vivian Caldwell's success had not insulated her from reality by accident, it had reorganized reality around her. Over time, reputation became a form of infrastructure, quietly shaping how information traveled and which signals were prioritized. Praise arrived early and often, criticism arrived late and softened, and uncertainty rarely arrived at all. This was not because Vivian demanded it. It was because success trained others to anticipate her preferences before she ever expressed them. Her dependence on image was not vanity, it was functionality. Image simplified complexity. It allowed institutions, partners, and audiences to understand her quickly and respond efficiently. The narrative of competence, resilience, and moral authority reduced friction across every interaction. When decisions aligned with that image, they were framed as leadership. When they did not, they were reframed until they did. Over time, reputation became both shield and compass, guiding outcomes without requiring interrogation. Within her professional empire, these dynamics hardened into structure. Layers of management filtered information upward, prioritizing clarity over contradiction. Metrics replaced nuance. Summaries replaced context. Risk assessments were designed to reassure rather than alarm. What Vivian received was not falsehood, but selection. The system learned which truths were welcome and which were unnecessary. Blind spots formed not from ignorance, but from efficiency. Admiration played a critical role in suppressing accountability. People closest to Vivian benefited from alignment, not opposition. To question her assumptions was to slow progress, to introduce uncertainty into a system optimized for momentum. Over time, even well-intentioned advisors learned to frame concerns as options rather than warnings. Accountability softened into consultation, and consultation often ended where comfort began. Psychologically, this insulation altered Vivian's relationship with criticism. Dissent, when it appeared, felt abstract rather than instructive. It arrived detached from consequence, delivered by voices already categorized as peripheral. Without sustained challenge, self-correction became theoretical. Confidence no longer needed reinforcement, it simply needed continuity. The absence of resistance was interpreted as validation, not omission. Early warning signs appeared quietly. Small inconsistencies in outcomes were explained away by scale. Delays were attributed to external variables. Friction was dismissed as transitional. The system remained profitable, visible, and admired, masking instability beneath performance. Vivian noticed these signals but did not prioritize them. In an environment where success was constant, anomalies felt temporary. What made these blind spots dangerous was not their existences, but their alignment. Structural design, psychological comfort, and social reinforcement converged to produce the same result: reduced sensitivity to contradiction. Vivian's empire functioned smoothly because it avoided discomfort. That avoidance gradually narrowed her field of awareness, making it harder to distinguish between stability and stagnation. From the outside, everything appeared intact. Public narratives remained coherent. Philanthropic efforts continued to generate goodwill. Media representation reinforced her status as a benchmark rather than a variable. The system validated itself by reflecting success back to its source. Blind spots remained invisible because nothing external forced them into view. Yet systems do not require intent to fail, they require imbalance. As admiration replaced inquiry, internal tension accumulated. Small misalignments compounded quietly. Processes optimized for speed lost flexibility. Feedback loops shortened, prioritizing reassurance over correction. Vivian's authority remained unquestioned, but authority without calibration drifts. Unbeknownst to her, observation had begun elsewhere. Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes did not see these blind spots as anomalies, they recognized them as patterns. Their distance from the system gave them clarity rather than confusion. They noticed how reputation preceded evaluation, how certainty replaced curiosity, how silence was rewarded when it preserved hierarchy. What Vivian experienced as normalcy, they recognized as vulnerability. This asymmetry mattered. Blind spots are most dangerous when they are visible to those least expected to notice them. Vivian's success had taught her where to look for risk. It had not taught her where not to look. The system that protected her from discomfort also prevented her from sensing attention that arrived without noise. Internally, the first signs of instability remained manageable. Externally, the narrative remained polished. But between these layers, space opened. In that space, assumptions went unchallenged, processes went unquestioned, and perception replaced verification. The system continued to function, unaware that its margins were being examined. Vivian's confidence remained intact because nothing had yet demanded its revision. The blind spots did not announce themselves. They waited, aligned with observation and patience rather than opposition. Success had elevated her beyond immediate consequence, but it had also narrowed her margin for error. These blind spots, formed gradually and reinforced collectively, did not remain invisible for long. Those excluded from the system often understand it best. Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes had never been invited into the spaces where decisions were made, but they had spent years studying the edges where those decisions took effect. Distance gave them perspective. While proximity often blurred judgment, exclusion sharpened it. They were not distracted by titles, decor, or language. They focused on outcomes. Their observation of power was quiet and methodical. Malik paid attention to repetition. He noticed how certain names altered conversations, how timelines shifted when influence entered the room, how urgency appeared selectively. Jordan focused on behavior. He watched how people deferred, how accountability dissolved when authority was implied rather than stated. Together, they began mapping how power actually moved, not how it was described. They did not learn rules. Rules were visible and inconsistent. They learned patterns. Patterns revealed themselves through contradiction when policies bent, when exceptions multiplied, when consequences stalled. Malik tracked these deviations with precision, recognizing that consistency mattered less than predictability. Jordan identified which behaviors were rewarded and which were ignored. This distinction became critical. Systems rarely announced their priorities. They demonstrated them. Knowledge came to them through necessity, not access. They learned because survival demanded it. Each mistake carried weight. Each miscalculation produced consequence. This sharpened their attention. They noticed how institutional language softened responsibility, how success narratives masked inefficiency, how silence functioned as approval. What others overlooked as routine, they cataloged as structure. Their understanding of leverage developed without intent to harm. Leverage, to them, was not about domination. It was about balance. They recognized that systems resisted disruption but struggled with exposure. Visibility, when unplanned, created instability. Malik understood that leverage often emerged where incentives misaligned. Jordan recognized that systems feared uncertainty more than opposition. These insights did not come from ambition. They came from observation. As their awareness deepened, it remained disciplined. They did not rush to conclusions. They tested assumptions against repetition. They compared outcomes across contexts. This analytical patience prevented overreach. They understood that premature action often revealed intent too early, triggering defenses before leverage matured. Silence preserved optionality. Observation refined accuracy. What made their position unusual was its invisibility. They remained outside formal structures, untracked and unaccounted for. This absence protected them from scrutiny. While others announced insight through credentials or access, Malik and Jordan accumulated understanding quietly. Their lack of recognition became an advantage. No one guarded against attention they did not perceive. Meanwhile, Vivian Caldwell's world continued to operate on familiarity. Her systems assumed risk would emerge through known channels. Oversight focused upward, not outward. This left gaps. Malik and Jordan noticed how information flowed vertically but rarely laterally. They recognized that complexity increased with scale, but accountability did not. This imbalance created friction points invisible to those benefiting from it. Their awareness began to translate into positioning. Not action, not confrontation, but proximity. They learned where processes intersected, where oversight overlapped, where assumptions converged. Malik identified points where narratives relied on unverified continuity. Jordan noted where authority assumed compliance without confirmation. These were not vulnerabilities in the dramatic sense. They were structural tensions waiting to be tested. Importantly, they did not personalize these insights. This was not about Vivian as an individual. It was about the ecosystem she represented. Their detachment preserved clarity. Emotional involvement would have distorted judgment. Instead, they treated the system as an object of study, neutral and responsive to input. Understanding replaced resentment. As their comprehension grew, so did the asymmetry between perception and reality. From the outside, Malik and Jordan remained unchanged. From the inside, their understanding approached sophistication. They did not possess power, but they understood it. This distinction mattered. Power reacts. Understanding anticipates. They became careful with time. Timing, they realized, was leverage's multiplier. Action taken too early revealed intention without effect. Action taken too late dissolved relevance. The system moved quickly in appearance but slowly in correction. This delay created opportunity. Malik and Jordan learned to measure momentum rather than moment. Their awareness did not isolate them. It grounded them. They remained attentive to their environment, disciplined in their routines, and controlled in their responses. Knowledge did not inflate them, it stabilized them. They understood that influence did not require visibility. It required alignment between insight and circumstance, unseen, unheard. And uninvited, Malik and Jordan stood closer to influence than anyone expected. Their understanding had outpaced recognition, and in systems that mistake visibility for control, that imbalance carried weight. Their proximity to power had changed, even if no one else yet realized it. Power shifts the moment it senses observation. Vivian Caldwell did not experience this shift as a sudden threat, but as a subtle disruption in rhythm. The systems that once responded smoothly now hesitated. Meetings that previously concluded with consensus began to linger. Processes that had followed predictable timelines introduced small delays. None of it was dramatic enough to alarm her, yet together these moments produced a faint but persistent tension she could not immediately place. At first, Vivian interpreted the resistance as external. Markets fluctuated. Institutions adjusted. Complexity increased with scale, and she had navigated complexity before. Her confidence remained intact, but it required more effort to sustain. Decisions that once felt instinctive now demanded review. The ease that had defined her authority began to thin, replaced by a cautious recalibration she did not consciously acknowledge. Psychological discomfort crept in quietly. It did not arrive as fear, but as friction. Vivian noticed herself revisiting decisions she would normally finalize without hesitation. She requested additional briefings, not because information was lacking, but because certainty felt less complete. Confidence had not vanished, it had become conditional. This subtle shift unsettled her more than overt opposition ever could. What troubled her most was the loss of narrative control. Vivian had always understood the story surrounding her influence. It was cohesive, flattering, and consistent. Now the narrative began to fragment. Questions surfaced indirectly. Assumptions required reinforcement. The system that once echoed her authority back to her began reflecting it with slight distortion. She remained the center, but the reflection no longer felt perfectly aligned. Authority, when stable, feels expansive. When destabilized, it feels constrained. Vivian sensed that constraint without understanding its origin. The usual markers of dominance remained visible, yet their effect diminished. Compliance arrived slower. Agreement felt more procedural than genuine. These changes did not announce challenge, they suggested scrutiny. And scrutiny, when untraceable, undermines power more effectively than resistance. The most disorienting aspect was the absence of a visible source. There was no competitor to confront, no dissenting voice to silence, no external force to negotiate with. The pressure arrived without identity. It existed as atmosphere rather than event. Vivian's systems were designed to respond to identifiable risk. They were less equipped to detect attention that arrived without engagement. As weeks passed, the discomfort deepened. Vivian found herself compensating, reinforcing authority through visibility rather than substance. Appearances increased. Messaging tightened. These adjustments stabilized perception but failed to resolve the underlying tension. The more she asserted control, the more she sensed its fragility. Authority was still present, but it no longer felt unquestioned. Internally, this created strain. Vivian had built her career on precision and discipline. Uncertainty disrupted both. She began to experience moments of self-doubt, quickly dismissed yet increasingly frequent. The system around her continued to function, but its margins felt thinner. Small disruptions carried disproportionate weight. Minor inconsistencies demanded explanation. The cost of maintaining dominance rose. Meanwhile, the source of observation remained invisible. Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes had not altered their behavior. They had not increased proximity or visibility. Their attention remained disciplined, calibrated, and silent. They understood that observation, when detected, loses its advantage. Their restraint preserved asymmetry. Vivian sensed scrutiny without recognizing its origin. This imbalance intensified the pressure. Power is most comfortable when it understands its boundaries. Here, boundaries blurred. Vivian could not locate the edge of resistance, nor could she measure its scope. The uncertainty disrupted her ability to prioritize. She began responding to potential threats rather than actual ones, expending energy on stabilization rather than progress. Authority began to feel unstable not because it was challenged, but because it was questioned without confrontation. The system around Vivian mirrored her unease, adjusting behavior subtly in response. This feedback loop amplified tension. Each adjustment confirmed the sense that something had shifted, even if nothing concrete could be named. Vivian's world had taught her to expect opposition when power was threatened. What she encountered instead was attention without declaration. The lack of identifiable conflict deprived her of strategy. She could not negotiate with silence or neutralize observation. The tools that had served her so well offered no clear solution. As this unseen pressure tightened, Vivian remained outwardly composed. Her public image did not fracture. Internally, however, certainty eroded. The architecture of her authority still stood, but its foundations felt less secure. Power, once effortless, now required vigilance, and vigilance, sustained without clarity, began to exhaust even the most disciplined authority. Truth surfaces quietly when no one is trying to force it. The shift did not begin with accusation or rebellion, but with process. Systems that had once appeared seamless began revealing minor inconsistencies, small enough to dismiss individually, yet persistent enough to attract attention when viewed together. Reports required clarification. Outcomes demanded justification. What had once moved forward on assumption now paused under verification. No one announced a problem, but the system began asking questions it had previously skipped. Vivian Caldwell encountered this change indirectly. Her influence remained intact in form, but its effect weakened in practice. Decisions that once carried immediate authority now required substantiation. Agreements moved forward, but with conditions. The difference was subtle, almost polite, yet unmistakable. Authority was no longer presumed correct by default. It had to demonstrate coherence. This was not rebellion. It was calibration. The exposure unfolded without confrontation because it did not rely on opposition. It relied on alignment between facts that could no longer be ignored. Processes designed to protect efficiency began prioritizing accuracy. Data points that once lived in isolation were compared. Timelines were revisited. Outcomes were measured against intention. The system did not accuse Vivian of failure. It simply stopped compensating for her assumptions. This shift unsettled her more than open resistance ever could. There was no argument to win, no critic to discredit. The facts stood on their own, impersonal and indifferent. Vivian recognized the change instinctively. Her influence was being challenged not by emotion, but by verification. The architecture that once absorbed friction now redirected it inward. Public perception adjusted slowly. There was no dramatic reversal, no scandal to capture attention. Instead, tone shifted. Language softened. Praise became conditional. Narratives introduced nuance where certainty once dominated. The public did not turn against Vivian, it recalibrated its expectations. Success was still acknowledged, but no longer treated as infallible. Malik Turner and Jordan Hayes remained unnamed and unseen throughout this shift. Their role was not to expose, but to observe alignment. They understood that systems correct themselves when pressure is applied without identification. Visibility would have compromised the process. Their anonymity preserved neutrality. The truth did not need an advocate, it needed space. As facts accumulated, power began to erode quietly. Not through collapse, but through redistribution. Authority fragmented, shared across verification processes rather than concentrated in assumption. Vivian still occupied a central role, but the ground beneath it softened. Influence became contingent. This erosion was not punitive. It was corrective. Vivian sensed the change before she fully understood it. The balance she had relied on for years no longer held with the same certainty. Control required justification. Leadership required explanation. The system had not turned against her, it had matured beyond unexamined deference. This realization forced an internal reckoning she had long avoided. What made the exposure irreversible was its neutrality. There was no single moment to contest, no narrative to reclaim. Each adjustment felt reasonable in isolation. Together, they redefined the terms of authority. Vivian could respond only by adapting, not by asserting. Power that once flowed outward now encountered resistance through process. For Malik and Jordan, this moment confirmed what observation had taught them. Systems resist noise but respond to alignment. The absence of confrontation preserved legitimacy. The truth surfaced because it was allowed to, not because it was forced into view. Their restraint ensured the outcome belonged to the system itself, not to individuals. As perception continued to shift, Vivian's confidence adjusted under pressure. The erosion did not diminish her achievements, but it reframed them. Authority became contextual rather than absolute. The distance between image and reality narrowed, exposing complexity she had long bypassed. The balance was no longer fixed. It was moving quietly and deliberately toward equilibrium. Stories like this only matter if they continue beyond the screen. If this made you pause, reflect, or see power differently, let it stay alive by sharing it forward. Support stories that reward awareness over noise and help this space grow for people who value depth. Your engagement decides which stories deserve to be told next. This story was never about wealth, poverty, or status. It was about who gets underestimated and who is paying attention. In your own life, who did you once overlook or who might be overlooking you right now?